This is the 31st of August, 2023, First Congregational Church, and I am interviewing Steve Kern and Nancy Henjum. Good morning.
Good morning, Cathy.
Great to see you both.
Yeah.
I thought on the way in today, the two former moderators. Pretty impressive.
I don't know if it's impressive, but yes, two former moderators.
Well, one of the questions that they suggest asking is, what committees were you on?
Oh, yeah, right.
And so perhaps you could tell me a little bit about what kind of led you up to the idea of taking on the big task of being moderator.
Sure.
Were you active in other ways at first?
Yeah. I think you should start because you were moderator before I was, in fact. President of the board, in fact, I think.
Right. So I actually got a call out of the blue about being on the board and serving as chairperson for the worship council. And my response was, I know nothing about worship. I'm not even sure what I think we should be worshiping. And the response I got was, exactly, that's perfect. You won't have a dog in the fight.
Yeah, yeah.
It was a time when the church was considering alternative worship, and that had led to some controversy. And so I think they were hoping that a person might come on who could just be good with process and listen and ask good questions.
And they were right.
Well, it was fascinating because I got to learn an awful lot about what people find most important in their worship experience, including that many of the things that drive me crazy are actually the favorite parts of a worship service of other people. And I'll never forget, in line with that, once complaining to Lynn Boudreau about some of the hymns, and she was like, oh my gosh, that's the best part. And I said, well, the part I really like about the hymns, and this was when Scott Christiansen was our organist, and he would do these variations, harmonic variations in the fourth chorus, in the fourth verse, that just went all over the place, right? And people kept singing the melody and so on while he was doing this wild stuff underneath. And I loved that. And at that point, Lynn was like, that's horrible. I hate that. So anyway, it was from being on worship council that then led to becoming board chair a couple years later. And that was when we did the big constitutional change at that point to get rid of being a board of directors and to go back to something a little bit more traditional, like a church council, which is UCC's and many other Protestant churches, right?
So then you went back to being the moderator?
That's right. So actually I never got to be the moderator because it was, I think, about the last thing that we did during my term was vote on that constitutional change. And then the person, and I think it was Andrea Barker, who was after me, then she became the first moderator, and I was the last president.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's my
a bit of history. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And Nance, how about you?
Yeah, well, I just remember Eric Ridings calling me, and he was on the nominating committee at the time, and he said, you know, first of all, don't let anybody know I'm asking you, just in case you say no. Would you consider being moderator? And I gave it some real thought and thought, you know what, I think this is actually a good time for me to step into leadership. And it was during that time, actually, that we entered the capital campaign that addressed accessibility and actually the significant renovation of our church, and which was, you know, a little bit controversial. But it was a good experience, and I'm really glad I did it. And just one other thing about that, upon my leaving, then, you know, historically, the folks leaving off of council have become the next nominating committee, or what we now call Leadership Cultivation Committee, which was really a term I coined and said we need to stop making this like a secret tap on the shoulder. Like, it needs to be much more open and open process for and people desiring to be in the leadership position, not like, oh, okay, that's my turn, I'll do it. So yeah, it was a great experience, and learned a lot about the church, and built much more significant and deep relationships through that process. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. So just going back for a moment, then what drew you to the church itself initially? What made you walk through the door?
So we moved here in the summer of 1990. I had not grown up in a family that attended church. Nancy had. And when we were still living in Chicago, I started this process of learning about Christianity and reading the Bible, going to church there. And when we came to Colorado Springs, knowing that we were going to have kids at some point, we thought, well, let's go looking around for churches. And it was in the spring, I remember, that we started. And I went with Nancy. We went to the Unitarian Church a couple blocks away. And I loved it. The first service we went to, I remember, was the spring because it was about May Day, and the maypole is this pagan thing. It was great. And then the next one, there were a couple of Buddhist monks that came. That was really awesome. The third week we went, I don't remember what the content was, except we walked out and Nancy was like, right, 3 weeks in a row, never heard the word Jesus. Not going back to that church. So we kept looking, and it was First Congregational that we came to pretty quickly after that.
Yeah, and it was, I think what's true for perhaps a lot of people who joined around the time that we did, it was Jim White's interview with Bill Moyer on the Unholy Wars, and hearing his response to some of those questions about what was happening in Colorado Springs, and we both went, yeah, that's a church we need to go check out. So we did, and the very first Sunday was Jim White running up and down the aisles talking about geologic time, and Jesus did come in there somewhere too, but
at least once.
Yeah. So I think pretty quickly we determined that this was a place to call home. Yeah.
Well, it seemed like it was very easy to find other people who, coming from very, very diverse backgrounds, some UCC people too, but many others, who were looking for, at that point in their lives, looking for something that was a little different. And one of the common denominators was, I think, for many, a certain kind of community that would be welcoming without being judgmental about things. And then also would include curiosity as an important sort of feature. I remember early on hearing what I still really love about baptisms, that line, we won't presume to tell you what to believe. And I think that may be somewhat exceptional for a lot of faith communities, a lot of churches, to be that open about things. Now, that has some problems to it too. You could say, well, where's the cohesion? Where's the coherence? Where's the deep and profound commitment to something like a certain theology? But that was never important to me, as a person that was seeking. So here was a church where, for instance, the Forum often had topics that were somewhat controversial, and someone would come in and talk about them, and there'd be a discussion, there'd be a conversation. And at the end, there wouldn't be this summarizing, okay, right, here's what we've now all decided. Instead, those conversations usually opened further, and I love that. In that sense, it feels to me like a really great classroom as a former teacher. That spirit of inquiry has always been very important to me.
Yeah.
And then you did go on and have kids.
Yeah.
Right. And then the kids came to church with you.
Yeah. In fact, I think really early, we joined in 92 or 93, and Dylan was born in
92.
Yeah. So actually both baptized in the church, and honestly found great community then. And I distinctly remember one time when Dylan was very young, and being a parent is challenging, and it kind of really practically losing my shit with my kid. And the nursery person who, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting her name right now. She had 5, oh, you would know her name. Oh, what is her name? She had so many kids here. Oh, makes me mad. I can't think of her name. Anyway, she was just so great. She was just so calming, and this is really hard. Actually, why don't you just go home for a few minutes and come back, and we've got everything covered. And I remember thinking, wow, when my church community doesn't judge me for struggling as a parent and gave me support, to be a better parent, that was amazing. So that was very much a part of, it has been a great thing about this community.
Yeah. One of the questions is that they'd like the committee would like to know your happiest memory of the church.
Wow, I have so many.
Do you?
Yeah, it's really hard to come up with one. I mean, whether it's being body and having a great time at the Madrigal, or Ruth Konigsamen throwing a hat party for me when I lost all of my hair from cancer treatment, and having the community come around and support me in that regard. Doing movement and body movement and dancing with Jenny Finn in the Founders Room, and experimenting with embodiment. I mean, those just three popped right into my head as really great, happy memories. And there are so many more, but those are a few. Yeah.
I would add, for a number of years, I think it was probably Jim White that would have had to give permission for this, but I played in a jazz band with 5 or 6 other people, and we used the sanctuary to rehearse on Wednesdays. And for a number of summers in a row, we essentially provided the Jazz Sunday. That was great. And one of those Sundays,
That sure was.
it was really fun, really fun. And Ted Barthel, who lives in Chicago now, I believe, was the saxophone player at the time, and he and I wrote this piece called 20 East St. Vrain that we played a few times for the church. So that was really an amazing set of experiences. Also, our daughter Kate delivered a sermon that was ecologically oriented. And how old was she?
She was in 5th grade.
She was a 5th grader. She wrote this thing, got up and did it. And now she's Associate Director of Ecology and Environment for the Aspen Institute. So these things start...
Stick with you.
That's right. These things start early.
And
our son, who still lives in the area, he now and then comes back. Every now and then he'll show up. And I think his faith, in terms of being a little bit more orthodox, actually is even more like firmer than my own anyway. I don't know whether that's true for you or not, but those kids growing up in this church and going to church camp, there'd be another set
that's
of...
a great set of...
another set of memories.
Yeah.
Having fun and being silly there. And that was really important for them. And then the family camp out in the falls. We went to a number of those too.
Well, one I have to say, just because I was so excited to bring gospel music into this church with Neil Brown and the gospel Sundays, having kind of sang in the gospel choir for a while, and honestly preferring that kind of music quite a bit more myself. But I'm so excited because he's actually going to, on the 10th, he's going to be doing a song with us.
Oh, that's great.
So I'm really happy about that.
I remember that was a happy memory.
Yeah.
I also remember after we had a terrible tragedy, that we came to church, and it was some type of gun violence, I believe. And it might have been Columbine.
I think it was Columbine.
Yeah. And we were all so stricken. And but it was you, Nancy, who was able to embody all of us by openly weeping for us. And I've often thought about that. When you weep, I'll weep with you. When you laugh, I'll laugh.
I have
with you.
wept many times in our pews. And always felt completely acceptable to do that, to just express.
In fact, that was welcomed. Everybody was feeling that, and you were able to move it along for us, which is always wonderful. One of the other things that they would like you to share with us is what you would tell the congregation. What about the next 150 years? What do you think that we should take now and really move forward? Things that have real meaning, that have strength, that really we should try to move forward for the next 100 years. The future, I should say.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is really how we end every service, which is to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly. Like, to continue in that practice as a church, I think, has served us well. And to continue in that way. I mean, it's wisdom that goes very far back, and I think for a reason, it needs to carry us forward. I think that, and the God is still speaking, the continuing to be open to, what is next.
So the deep roots of the UCC and church,
that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I think churches always, or it seems anyway, that they struggle with this dynamic of, is the church itself as an institution supposed to do very specific good things out in the community? Is it, or of course, because it's not a dichotomy, but or is its fundamental purpose about taking care of its congregation so that individual congregants can go out, whether they're operating underneath the umbrella of that specific church, or whether they're sufficiently fueled, taken care of, so that they've got something, more to give. And I don't know, I've never really talked to people about this, but my guess is that if you surveyed a congregation like ours, you'd find the full spectrum there representative. Some people wishing that we were much more community-facing and much more active and potentially even aggressive in addressing justice issues, for instance, of all kinds. And so you can see movements over the 30 years or so that we've been here of individuals who've become very, very passionate about that. And then others who've had a more contemplative orientation to the church and have been perfectly satisfied, but have sought additional opportunities to deepen their own spiritual practices, so that, again, they can be sufficiently fueled as they go out into the world. And of course, both of those things, I think, are important, but in a church our size that's several hundreds, not several thousands, I think that conversation is one that's always going to be there, because you're not necessarily going to have the critical mass to have this enormous effort that fundamentally, in really huge ways, makes an impact in a local setting. That said, look, every Pride Parade, when this church walks down Tejon with its big flag, I mean, that's profound. That's beautiful, and that's a thread that runs through this church for as long as I've been here. And seeing the way that people in the community respond. Oh my gosh, here's this church with a pretty traditional name. Look at their flag. Look at how many people.
Right, and now look how old they are.
Yeah.
Exactly, I said, right. Look how old they are.
Good point.
Yeah. So I think continuing to be courageous, whether it's about, asking and developing those trickier contemplative opportunities, or being courageous and identifying the outward-facing issues that would seem to, inspire many of us. Both of those things are important.
Yeah. I will add one thing, and Leanne actually spoke to it just this last Sunday when she was recalling her interview with the search committee and Sylvie being on the screen and talking about kids or youth, not just kind of the future, but the present of the church, and continuing to really embody that, whatever that looks like, in the way that our youth need it to be, which may not be exactly how we're engaging with the youth, and really continuing to listen so that there is a future, whatever that might look like, is critical. And I think now at this point in time, it's about connection. It's about finding connection, human connection, and welcoming in a way that we all need. So
Finding our people.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like quite the journey. What can I say?
Yeah.
Many of the things you talked about, I would say Jesus would approve.
Yes.
Yeah.
He would,
but not
there.
necessarily demand.
Right.
There you go.
I used to have this kind of argument with Andy Finn about, like, I don't know, what would the Lord require? I don't think the Lord requires anything of us. I'm like, well, it depends on how you understand that word, Andy. But yeah, I get your point.
That's very First Congregational.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Precisely.
Well.
Yeah. Can I tell one quick funny story that just has to be recorded if somebody hasn't done it already? It is one Sunday when Jim White was our lead minister, and he left to go use the restroom, and he forgot to turn his mic off, and the entire congregation listened to his elimination of water. And it was hysterical, and everybody laughed, and it was
especially
just such a human moment. And again, I don't know maybe how other churches might, cultures might have handled that, but that we just laughed at that and found like the holiness in that moment was pretty great.
Yeah. Finding the holiness in the moment. Finding the divine
Yeah.
when it breaks into the ordinary.
Yeah.
I think this church is very good at that.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, and Jerry bringing film into it, that just came to my mind too, and some of the films that we've seen. I mean, there's just like you keep going on and on. 33 years, 32 years, whatever. It's a long time.
Thank you so much for all those years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you.
And for today.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Our pleasure.
Thanks, Cathy.